Hello everyone, and welcome to the show.
If you should awaken, I will be there when you wake from your lovely
Welcome back. It's just after Christmas, just after New Year's, and we're about to get down to the nitty-gritty of the educational part of why I am here. As a spiritualist, I'm here to bring divine messaging. Now, we're at a part of the book where Jesus Christ has entered the mystery schools in Egypt. A lot of people didn't know where Jesus was as a child. Well, we know where he was. He left Egypt. He left Israel, that whole area there, and then he went into Egypt to get away from what he knew would become ultimately his impending death. There were people who were after him. So just like Horus, Jesus had to escape. Now, he went to a city called Hermopolis. Hermopolis. You keep hearing me refer to the person Hermes, the thrice born. Well, Hermopolis is the city that was named after Hermes. Hermes was the scribe of the god, the person who wrote over 2,000 books on the subject. He is, in fact, in my opinion, the most important human being that ever lived. The reason I say that is simply because Hermes had abilities to incarnate and remember everything he had known in his past life. And maybe that has something to do with where Hermes was from. It reminds me of where religion comes in, talking about the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were some scrolls that had information on them that was like the oldest information human beings had about religion. They call it the original Bible. Where they found these scrolls were in a cave back in the 40s. Recently, they found these scrolls in a cave. An accident. A little boy was playing with some rocks out there on the desert, and he heard something break, and he climbed up there, and they found the Dead Sea Scrolls that had been hidden in the caves by a religious group called the Essenes. Now, the Essenes were up against the Roman Empire, and they knew they weren't strong enough to defeat the Roman Empire, so they knew they would be destroyed and killed. So they had all of their religious writings about history. What made these scrolls the most interesting was some of the things that they said. There's a whole chapter in these scrolls talking about these beings called the Watchers, and explains how Enoch was communicated with by the Watchers. Now, back in chapter 26, I explained to you who the Watchers were and why they were here. If you want to go back to chapter 26, you could find those. Those are those angels that decided they didn't want to be in heaven anymore because they want to experience life on earth. The Creator made a deal with them, said, okay, I'm going to allow 200 of you to go down to earth and exist, but your main purpose is going to be to help. Actually, it happened a little different. He sent them down because that's what they wanted to do. And then they came down here and acted a fool. They started having babies with the locals. They started doing all kinds of obnoxious things. And as a punishment, the Creator God said, okay, this is what you're going to do for a millennium. You're going to go down and you're going to keep an eye on the beings and you're going to help them and you're going to try to rectify all the damage that you just did with all these innocent people. God, the Creator God, being omnipotent, he already knew they were going to go down there and screw up. But he allowed them to do it anyway because they needed to get it off their chest. And he knew the penalty would be, okay, now, this is what you guys would be doing. That's the story of the Watchers, taken from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, I bring that up to bring up exactly where Hermes fits in all this, because he was not a part of that. He is a part of the Greek dynasty of gods. In the Greek pantheon, they call them. The Greek pantheon, what we know about those so-called gods, they call them gods simply because they were advanced beings. What we know about them is they didn't come from here. They came from a place in the Sirius star system. We know this because it is also backed up by several civilizations here on Earth, and especially the Dogon tribe of Africa. As soon as they made contact with this Dogon tribe, the Dogon had extremely accurate and precise, and what they knew about these beings that had come down from Sirius was immense. They based their whole civilization on everything they learned from these people. Everything they learned, the Dogon tribe. See, so they almost verified the reality that these beings came from a different place, as well as people from all over the world knowing something about these beings. Who these beings were the Greek pantheon. They consist of the father was the main one. His name was Kronos. Now Kronos had 3 sons. One of them was almost a god of water. He was called Poseidon. He was able to live in empires underneath the water because he was just like that. If you see the movie Aquaman, well, that's sort of a Poseidon's kind of a thing there, and they existed underwater. That's Poseidon, one of the brothers. The other one was Zeus. Zeus was the one who controlled the air. Zeus controlled the air, and he had another brother named Hades. Hades controlled the underworld because these planets are not solid as you think. These planets are just as full inside as they are. There is more room inside of a planet than there is on the outside, because the outside is a flat surface circumference, whereas on the inside, I believe that this planet is dug out like ant hills, where you just have different things. The planet is so big, for instance, you could, okay, let it suffice to say, Hades was in charge of that. That's why when they started calling hell, hell, because Hades in the Greek pantheon was in charge of the underneath. So they just put that on when they were creating the Bible. They had to think of a place to send people, to scare people, so they called it hell because of Hades. The other, now Zeus. Talked about Zeus. He was a god of air, the surface. He had sons. Number 1 son was Apollo, the Greek god Apollo. Then he had Hermes. Hermes was Apollo's little brother, older brother to Aphrodite and Persephone. So So this is where these pantheons come from. But these pantheons are not fake. These were real beings, real beings. Hermes is one of them. I'm just trying to give you an example of who Hermes is and where he comes from. I can tell you more about him as we go along because he's my favorite human being, and I am somewhat of a connoisseur on Hermes. Anyway, in the last chapter, we discussed how Hermes and Lucifer got together and decided to flip the script on religion. The reason being is that Lucifer wanted to be a god if Jehovah could be one. Lucifer is an archangel. Jehovah and Yahweh are not even that. These are simply beings that were a part of an alien race that came to earth and started mankind and started calling themselves gods, but they weren't gods really. The creator of the universe is the true creator. That factor is the only thing that's supposed to be creating beings. Beings are not supposed to create beings. Why? Because their natural instinct is to pretend they are gods of the beings they created, just like people think they are the masters of the animals that they own. Well, that's fine if you can train them, but if you try to do that to the wrong animal, like a snake, well, it will have a tendency to revert back to its original nature. But we can make pets out of creatures. The beings that created mankind were creating pets out of us. And they called themselves gods, which offended Lucifer, because Lucifer said, you ain't a god. If you can be one, then I want to be one too. Jehovah told him no, he cannot, unless he bowed down to Adam, which he refused to do. And that's when Satan decided, I'm going to take over this whole thing. Lucifer was not a bad guy. He just was pissed off because of this fact. Now, the thing about it is Hermes also felt that since he was there for the creation of mankind and that he was there for the develop of mankind's evolving into higher levels of humanity, once they got into Egypt, he was in control of all that. And Hermes also knew that he was halfway responsible from human beings evolving from Homo sapien to Homo sapiens sapient. Hermes was a real true father of Isis. So what we have here is Hermes, who felt he wanted to be a god too. Lucifer and Hermes said, look, we want to be written into the pantheon. All you have to do to be a god these days is to be written into the Bible, written into the Dead Sea Scrolls, written in, wherever there's something to be written in about who's a god. That's what they want to do. So they refused. That's when Lucifer said, I'm going to take over this whole thing. What Lucifer did, in fact, was basically introduced a whole different kind of a creator. The creator prior to that in the Old Testament was one where if you didn't do what he said, he would destroy you. He will kill you. He will put you in, there'll be a flood, anything. He's a mean dude. And actually, that's how these Elohims of the book of Genesis were. They were pretty much either you do what we want you to do or we will destroy you. That's the truth. Keep in mind, that's not the creator of the universe talking. That is the Elohims of the book of Genesis. And so what Lucifer was saying, which he said, why don't I come in with an ideology of a loving God that will forgive you, who will forgive everything and will love you and take care of you and anything that he knew psychologically you would want. That's what Lucifer said. And Lucifer said, Lucifer and Hermes decided what we're going to do is we're going to take an individual and we're going to raise him in Egypt. And we're going to teach him at the mystery schools how to be a certain way. What he needed him to do is master the 7 Hermetic principles. The 7 Hermetic principles are exactly what Jesus was, especially the principle of polarity. The principle of polarity simply means that you will treat people and things the same way, no matter what degree they are, either way. Evil is the same as good, it's just another behavior. Jesus was trained to treat all people on the same level. And so basically means he can love those who you would ordinarily think wouldn't be lovable. He couldn't hate. And so this is how he was raised. This is exactly what he was taught in the mystery schools, which is where we're going right now. So let me introduce to you chapter number 56, day 1, Jesus at the mystery schools.
Chapter 56, day 1.
Day 1 in the mystery schools of Egypt at Hermopolis. The class was informed before school began that Master Hermes himself would not be teaching this year. However, he may make several appearances throughout the sessions. This class will be conducted by several of the esteemed pyramid priests that have mastered the philosophies of Hermeticism. There are 10 students in this class, all soon to be priests, with the one exception that would be me. We sat in a chamber of what seemed to be a spiritual gathering place, with candles lit and the smell of sage and scented oils. All students are young men, and I did hear that the school did not accept females, and I have yet to see one since we've arrived. We sat patiently awaiting the priest to enter when suddenly 12 torches on the perimeter walls burst into flames. All at once the flames spewed outward. I believe the magic was to get our undivided attention. Then 3 priests entered the room and stood in front of the class, facing the students. The 3 spoke one after another in a low reverent tone, as if they were a trio of priest entertainers. They explained the course curriculum, stating that they would begin with the principles of mentalism. One after the other they began by explaining the interworkings of the universe. They stated that the universe was made up of small particles of light and small particles of matter, neither of which I have any familiarity. The only light that I knew of was that of the torches or that of the sun. This was going to be extremely interesting. Once I knew what particles were, I would then be able to misunderstand even more. They spoke of a master of all that exist, and that all stars in the skies are in the mind of the all, and we too, and the world, were within the infinite mind of this all persona. The infinite mind contains all that exists within it. And as above so below. But below what? I wondered. One at a time they spoke of waves of possibilities, though I could not consider them without knowing where the waves were, and I saw no particles nor anything of the kind. I was so ashamed of my lack of knowing, that I felt like I was taught nothing in the past, to prepare myself for this. Everything that was explained was everything I did not understand, and so I daydreamed about the meal that my mother was preparing for me later. When the class was over, I seemed to understand less than I did when the class first began. Not knowing all that I did not know was more appealing to me. 4 hours later the class ended for the day, and feelings were largely hurt within me. I walked into the dwelling that was to be our home for the time, and my mother and father were eager to hear and understand today's teachings. I believe they even imagined me being able to teach them what I had learned as well. Of this I was truly ashamed. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and I answered. As I opened the door, what stood there was the most beautiful Egyptian girl. Beauty like that of which I had never seen anywhere at any time. She introduced herself as my new tutor and asked when did I wish to schedule my lessons. The pyramid priest seemed to know that no student had ever attended the school knowing anything that was being taught there. Thus the name mystery school did apply. My name is Yashaiah. Her beauty was so striking that I began to give her the most inappropriate replies. I then remembered her question and I replied, always. I mean, all the time, I mean, anytime, as my mother and my father struggled to understand my sudden strangeness. All without fully understanding my reasons. We shall start on Saturday next at noon. Will you be here? She asked. I am here, was my odd reply. So for 2 more days I struggle to understand the teachings, yet I look forward to Saturday, and the tutor, and me. All week we studied the mind, and all that I came to know was that it was meant. Saturday I was up at sunrise. I had only 6 hours to get ready for my new session. As I sat, 2 hours too soon, on a stone in front of our dwelling, my mother made me come back in for breakfast, but my stomach was too wound tightly for food to enter into. Her name was Cleopatra. Not that Cleopatra, but Cleopatra, all the same. I wanted to know all that I could, not of my studies but of the girl that was teaching me. I was fast asleep, sitting on a stone in front of our housing at the time she arrived, as I was awakened by her shaking of my shoulder. Goodbye, I said, as I jumped to my feet asking, who am I? I mean, who am you? I mean, you know, as I struggled to understand where and when this moment was. After she told me who I was, I then knew who she was and why she was here. After asking if she had eaten and she replied that she had, we began our studies. She began by explaining to me that in the universe created not by God, but by the infinite creator, there are many different possibilities at every moment. In our brains are many different pathways. As these pathways observe the possibilities begin to change into more finite ideas. This made sense, though not really. The more precise the idea, the more exacting the possibilities. Or the more you can see it in your mind, the more you will see it outside your mind, in reality. For example, she said that if you are poor and the only thing you can see yourself is poor, then you shall be poor. But if you are poor and you can see yourself with wealth, then the possibility of wealth is more assured. If you see yourself as love, you shall be more like love. If you see yourself strong, then strong you shall be. Until you no longer see yourself strong, then you shall become weak. The stronger the mind, the stronger the promise. So do you understand, Yeshaya? The universe is mental. The mind is mental. I see, Cleopatra. Now how then can I use this knowledge and belief to help the people in Palestine? Well, she said, if we lead with anger, we shall be angered. The anger surely will lead us to death. But if we lead with love, we begin to break down the probabilities of anger, changing it to love. This may take time, for the waves of anger are many, and you are but one. But with one mind you can change many more until anger cease. Young Yeshaya tried hard to understand all that Cleopatra was teaching, for he wanted her to think of him as smart for his years. So because of her he convinced himself of the idea of love over all things, and all things being love, which was easy to do, with her as his teacher, infatuation as his passion.
Subscribe and push the like button.
So welcome back, and I hope you enjoy that. Now, what I want to talk to you about is a bit of quantum physics, but I'm not going to explain it like science. I'm going to skip the boring science part and get down to what it really is, what it really means, what it has to do with anything. What they found out through variations of these experiments is that they were able to put in numbers, a formula that if written out, it will describe a probability factor. A probability factor meaning, okay, with this number, we can tell that if this happens and this happens, well, this will probably happen. And the probability factor means it is more likely that this happens than something else. To prove how accurate this system became, the scientists that came up with, the physicists that came up with this didn't really know what quantum physics was. All he knew was he had this formula. They then applied this formula to the industry that was created in Las Vegas, Nevada. They use this principle to basically say, if you give people this much opportunity to win money after they've given us a percentage, depending upon the number of people, we can take this thing from a one casino town to a casino that's bigger than the whole United States if we wanted to. The probability factor, which says that they would lose so much, but they would gain even more. In fact, they would gain 3 times more. They're going to give away some because that giving away is what's going to draw people to it in the first place. Even the lottery is set up the same way. More people will pay for lottery tickets than the money they're going to get when you win the lottery. So it's a win-win situation for the people who are putting on the lottery, just like Las Vegas is a win-win depending upon a probability factor which was created through quantum physics. Now, what this has to do with us is the probability of who you will become if you behave a certain way. There are physicists, and not necessarily physicists, but these are more like astrophysicists who believe we live in a multiverse. A multiverse is say you have 1,000 universes, and in each one of those universes, you play a different role. You are a different person in each one of them, which basically means when you are born, you take off in this direction, but if you go this way, you're going to end up on one of those worlds. If you go this way, you're going to end up one of these. Best way to describe it, let's say you're going to be a criminal-minded person. Well, your multiverse is going to sort of go in the direction of all the variety of criminal-minded things you could become. And then ultimately, you're going to get to a point where you focus in and you've done so many things, cause and effect wise, that will cause you to land on one of those verses, one of those multiverses that is befitting of all the damage that you did in the past. Same thing goes for if you want to be good, if you want to love everybody, that will basically eliminate all the negative verses, multiverses, and then you go towards the one that is consistent with what you are in your mind. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you on the next show.
Subscribe and push the like button.